the US healthcare spend is more than India's GDP.
Yeah.
We actually took a call to stop supporting Android and stop marketing.
Oh,
So we took a conscious call, and then I think 1 week's time, our India revenue came down by 85%.
if you had to raise again, how much would you have raised from the beginning to building the product? Hi, I'm Apoorv Shankar and welcome to the Hardware Story, a podcast wherein we decode how to build hardware. We all have read success stories of building software and digital startups, but building a hardware company has a separate set of challenges, and often these don't get talked about much. In the coming few years, India is going to grow to become a large manufacturing hub and have a large manufacturing ecosystem. And the idea here is to make it simpler for anyone who's starting out to build a hardware company from India and learn from the experiences of people who have done it before. Today, our guest is Aayush, who is the co-founder and CEO of Inito. It is also one of the first hardware companies out of India that was selected for YC for their accelerator program. Welcome to the show, Aayush.
Thank you, Poor.
Let's just get started with an intro, Aayush. What's your background? What's the company about? How large is the company?
So, I am Aayush. I am the co-founder of Inito, a home health testing company. I'll tell you about me first. So, I grew up in Punjab, in Patiala, did my schooling up to there, was very interested in building. I grew up playing with, opening up hardware gadgets, started assembling computers when I was in class like 7 or 8, learned coding in like class 6 or 7. And then I even represented India at NASA at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida in my high school.
Oh,
That was class 10 and 11, and we were the first team from India not just to qualify but actually win there globally. So I've been like building stuff since a very long time, and then realized that if you want to live in India and then you want to go to a good engineering school, so then you have to slog. So basically then stopped a lot of that stuff in class 12 and then thought, okay, let me take a year to study for JEE, and then I kind of landed up in IIT Roorkee. So yeah, I mean, I've been a geek all my life, building stuff, opening stuff, assembling stuff. Here I am with Inito. At Inito, our goal is very simple. We basically we believe that most of the conditions we have today, need regular monitoring, whether it's diabetes, whether it's, wellness or anything else, right? Most of the conditions we have actually need regular monitoring, but most of our healthcare system is designed for like episodic care. You kind of go there once and come back. So the goal is very simple. How do we build all the tests that someone would need to monitor their body at home in 5 minutes at their phone?
got it. And what's the first product that you had built about?
So our first product is a fertility hormone test. It measures 4 fertility hormones targeted at women trying to conceive. But like I said, we are very clear that we want to build everything that someone would want to, with this being the first one. If you look at like fertility, it's a very interesting market because 10-15 years ago, conditions like PCOS, etc. were virtually non-existent. But then now 1 in 3, 1 in 4 of all women actually have it, right? And then it's only going to increase, but with very little tools around, right? So this test basically helps you measure your fertility hormones and figure out what's happening in your body.
Got it. Actually, on the health parameter tracking side of things, I think we are also aligned.
Yeah.
Right, Ultra Human. We also think the same way, and we understand the value of data and people being able to measure something themselves. Only then they can take an action.
Yeah.
Right. So I think quite aligned on the health direction.
Yeah.
Now, coming to the next part, how do you meet your co-founder? When did you start? And what was the idea? Why did you start with this product?
I joined Siemens Corporate Research, after college. I mean, while I had some opportunities in joining a startup outside India, etc., but I really loved the folks here, so I just like ended up joining. And when I joined, my co-founder, I was actually on his notice period. He was on his way out. He was there for about 5-6 years. He was like the inventor of the year, had 25 patent applications in 5 years, etc. So like, I always believed that I was really strong at tech, but then I met him, and his older friends, while he was at Siemens, became my new friends, right? So we used to kind of hang out together and go out for kayaks, etc. And that's where we hit off very well, and we thought we'll do something. And it took us a while to figure out what we want to do. We knew we wanted to do something, and we wanted to solve a hard problem. We just won't be happy building just another app, right? So we wanted to solve a hard problem, but we didn't know what exactly. So I think it took us a while to figure out, and then we started building Inito. I think the vision was always very clear that we want to build everything, but fertility was a business call. We could see that the opportunity is going to become immense, but then virtually there's no product out there.
Got it. Did you find any personal issues around this in your family or someone you know?
Actually, no. Like, to be honest, like, I don't think that, especially the fertility one, started from any personal this thing. Like I said, like, I always was very keen on health. Like, I have a bunch of doctors in my family, etc. So I really believe in like home healthcare and kind of having the information you want to. Fertility was largely, we wanted to figure out where to get started with infertility was basically that.
Got it. How big is the team currently?
So other than the production staff, we are about 140 people.
140 people. And you're manufacturing where?
So we design, develop, manufacture everything in India. So everything is really run out of India. And then, this is a multidisciplinary space, right? So it's hardware, software, biotech, data science, and all of that put together. So we basically control right from obviously the user interpretation, the data science layer, to the the device, to the test strips, their assembly, and even now down to the chemicals that go inside the test strip. So we control the whole supply chain.
Got it. And what markets are you catering to now?
We are largely focused on the US in terms of customers. So 95% plus revenue is actually in the US.
Oh, wow. And you intend to cover the US for this whole year?
Yeah. So the way we look at this is, while I think we are all designed, developed, manufactured in India, we do believe that home health testing is going to be much bigger in the Western world than India. And I think there are like these market dynamics at play here. For example, like, most people or most of my friends don't have a dishwasher at home. But then, and most of them can afford dishwasher. We have expensive phones, etc. Right? But I think the core reason is that the top 10, 15 million Indians who can afford this kind of stuff also have super good access to healthcare, right? And it's almost why I give the dishwasher example, because I don't have a dishwasher because there's somebody who's going to come at home and wash the dishes, right?
True.
Like, I'm not going to wash my dishes myself, right? Like most Indians don't. But then I think the same thing applies to healthcare as well. Most of these 10, 15 million Indians who are going to buy modern gadgets or modern products actually have super good access to healthcare. If you want, you can get an appointment today. And that is unlike the West. I think in this way, the Indian Californians, what we call, differ from the West, is that we have a huge labor arbitrage, right, available to us. So we are not going to go to use a home test because somebody is going to come to our home for 50 rupees and actually collect the sample, right? Which is unlike the West, where a mean appointment time for a doctor can be as high as like 60 days, right? And it's even worse in infertility because doctors won't treat you for 1 year if you are under the age of 35. So I think the healthcare system is like that, where it's not that there's no paying power in India, but I think paying power plus, the whole healthcare system is just so slow outside India that the adoption for home healthcare is always going to be much higher outside India.
I think in your case, it's also the medical costs associated for any tests which you give results for. In the US, the tests are going to be much expensive.
Oh, absolutely. So just to give you perspective, the US healthcare spend is more than India's GDP.
Yeah.
Okay. And then anytime you build a home test, you are an order of magnitude cheaper than the lab. You're probably like 5 to 10x cheaper than the lab, right? So it kind of makes insane sense. So it's difficult to get a doctor appointment. It's difficult for a doctor to write a prescription, and it's like super expensive, right? So I think all these factors put together make the markets outside India far more valuable for this. And I do strongly believe that as an ecosystem, we will not grow by just serving our own markets. We will grow by actually competing with the world, because consumers in India today expect quality that is very world class, right? And you have to go fight in the deep waters of Western markets, learn from there, burn yourself, and only then you are actually good for India as well.
True.
Yeah.
Agreed. About the US story, how did that start? When did you start focusing on the US market more than, let's say, India, where you started off with? And what helped? Are you like on Amazon now? What are the sales channels working out?
So I'll give you a little bit of journey. So I would divide our journey into like 2-3 phases as a company, right? So the first is, obviously pre-sellable product, where a lot of it is development, engineering, prototype to production, like a lot of that kind of stuff, right? The second was we started selling in India. And at the same time, because we are a regulated product, so we are a class 1 medical device as per the US FDA. So there's a process that you need to go through to make sure you are compliant with all of FDA's requirements, whether it's, for example, all our manufacturing needs to be compliant with FDA's manufacturing standards, all our quality systems, etc. need to be compliant. So there's a kind of a learning curve as an organization to meet everything compliant to that, right? Even, for example, we are mandated, cybersecurity is important, but we are also mandated by law, right, to have certain cybersecurity standards. Our production also kind of needs to have certain standards, right? So it took us a while to get there. So when we were selling in India, at the same time, we are prepping up and making the organization ready to meet all of FDA's requirements. And I think somewhere in mid 21, so roughly about a little over 2 years, is where we actually launched in the US. Right.
Okay.
So I would characterize the first phase as development. Second phase is while we were selling in India, we were actually getting the regulatory approvals in the US. And then the third phase is when we actually launched in the US. And then, I think it took us about 5-6 months to figure out what channels work, what is our positioning, maybe 6-8 months. But once you actually figure that out, the ramp up is kind of just unheard of. I think we would have grown like 6x in the last 12 to 18 months, right? Like I think that growth is very hard to come by in India.
Got it. Okay. That's how you realize, okay, maybe the US market is the right one for us, and let's do this first, and then we'll...
Actually, no. So what happened was that, when we launched in the US, at some point our India and US were equal. But then when we were looking at the cohort data, when we were looking at, how many tests a consumer is taking, when we were looking at, the retention rates, the NPS, we realized that all of that is like much higher in the US, right? So we actually took a call to stop supporting Android and stop marketing.
Oh.
So we took a conscious call, and then I think in 1 week's time, our India revenue came down by 85%.
Wow.
So we took that call, even though US and India were equal at that time, right?
But why would you take that call? Does that require continuous support?
So I think when you sell in two different markets, we realized, so when we were selling in India, we realized that a lot of acquisition is going to be Hindi as well, right? So, your customer support needs to support both India and the US. We were a small team, so we wanted to double down and focus on iOS itself. For us, and actually have a much higher standard in iOS than because the expectation of the consumer is more. And iOS has grown like many fold in India in the last 2-3 years, right? So even 2 years ago, iOS was like 5-6 times smaller market share. So we realized that as a small company, it's best to focus and pick, and basically reducing our revenue by 40%, because overall India and US was half. India 85% was gone, right? And we took that call to actually let it go. But then what it allowed us to really focus on the US, you could simplify a lot of teams, you could simplify a lot of development. We moved our Android devs to iOS. We stopped focusing at all completely.
Okay.
So I think we could make a much better product. We could understand the market better, because even our customer acquisition was split between India and US. We had different teams looking at it. So I think it just unified the whole thing, and we discovered PMF in that process. I think we had discovered, but we didn't know we had discovered in the right way. So I think there's a discovery process in what language do you speak to consumers, etc. And once we discovered that, it kind of grew very fast. So in hindsight, I think it was a good decision. But then I think if we didn't, it won't have been a good decision. Then everybody would be calling us stupid. So it's
No, it makes sense. Actually, even for us, 70-80% of our consumers are on iOS.
Yeah. So then that argument is there, right? Like, should you even do Android, for example, right? And we can have a discussion. And now we'll kind of get back to Android now. I think we are building a renewed Android app now, because obviously we are a little bit bigger now. We have more resources to focus on two things. But yeah, at that time we said, okay, let's just focus and grow what we have.
Understand. I actually happened to check your Instagram page for Inito last night, and surprisingly, the kind of content I would expect on a page which talks about a product around women health, fertility monitoring, I'd assume that there will be testimonials which are going to be very serious conversations about how the product is, education about the same. I was surprised by finding memes on the page. And I think the way you are educating customers about your product is amazing. It's lovely to see fun content around a topic which basically no one talks about.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's quite surprising and very cool.
I think what we learned along the way is people come to social media for entertainment, right? Yes, they have a problem which they want to learn about, but at the end of the day, you open social media to relax, right? Like
True.
most people. So
True.
You can't have super heavy conversations with people there. So you need to like figure out a way to kind of take super heavy conversations and make it engaging.
Yeah. Actually, for the audience, we'll just pull up one meme from the page and show it
Sure.
this time.
525,600 minutes.
Actually, quite cool. Currently, what's the stage of the company in terms of production and investments you've raised?
We raised our Series A very recently. I think it was announced last month itself, like about 2 months ago. But then we have been around for a while. In fact, what most people don't know that we ended up raising 9 million from angels and family offices, which is kind of unheard in the
It is unheard.
in the ecosystem, right? And we all know that hardware is a tough space to be in, especially in terms of fundraising, etc. So as first time founders with no prior experience, nobody wanted to put money. No VC wanted to put money.
Yeah.
We kind of initially raised from angels in India, then we went to IC, we raised from angels in the US, and then over time we were able to build a network of angel and family offices across India and the US, and who cumulatively basically put about like 9 million, give or take. And we have raised small checks, big checks, like everything. But I think there have been instances where we didn't have money, team was not paid. So we have gone through like all that, basically been like really laser focused, almost like a cockroach, not spending anything. And we finally raised our Series A. But then I think we are in a good spot at this point when we raised our Series A because, the business is growing very healthily. NPS is very high and we see a clear path to growth. So I think we raised at this point, but then I think what's most unique about our journey is the fact that we raised 9 million from angels before we raised our first institutional capital.
Yeah, that's actually quite new.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that too. But hats off, man. I think you've been doing this for quite some time, and hardware is a tough journey. All of us know that.
Yeah.
We've all been through our phases.
Yeah.
So congrats on the new round too.
Thank you.
This is from a VC, or how's that?
So Fireside Ventures led the round. So Fireside is one of the best consumers we see in the country. It's the best consumer we see.
I think it's a new bet for Fireside as well. Something in medical and consumer.
Yeah. Right? So they have been doing a lot of consumers investments, right? And honestly, I think they trust our tech abilities, and we think that we could use their help in consumer, direct to consumer, go to markets, right? So I think that way it's a fit. We understand tech, we have our teams, and I think they kind of provide us the complementary skills on how to think about building a consumer brand.
Makes sense. Got it. And production wise, how's it going these days? Typically, what's the production numbers per month that you see these days?
I think I won't give the exact numbers, but the device would be thousands and strips would be hundreds of thousands.
How come? Oh yeah, because
the test strip
strips.
is a consumable, right? So
correct.
we will do a couple of million tests in a year.
Understand.
So we do a couple of million tests in a year, right? And I think that is
got it.
Where the recurring stuff happens. So
Cool,
obviously the scale of both are different.
Understood. Getting to the IP generation, you are a medical health company, and there are some biotech grants which are available from the government of India as well. And I wanted to understand, how's your IP generation been like? How's your grant journey been like? Has there been any support from the government?
There are of course a lot of grants today. We necessarily didn't so we haven't used any grant honestly till now.
Oh, is it?
Right? We have gotten some money indirectly as equity capital, but I think we haven't got any grant till now.
Okay.
Right? However, I think there are a lot of grants today that are supported by the government. But what I've also seen across companies is many of these companies would basically do one grant and then another grant, another
True.
grant, and they never come out of that,
True.
right? I think there's an advantage of having an equity investor, whether it's angel, a family
Agreed.
office, or a VC, because that also keeps you accountable,
Yeah.
right? And so I think you should use grant money, but use it with a combination of equity capital, because I think that also holds you accountable.
True.
We are an IP heavy company. We have close to about a dozen patent applications across the different parts of the product, right? And they are very valuable. But then, just to be clear, patenting is a defense strategy, right? And one patent doesn't grant you defense, because with patents there's always like other ways to do stuff.
True.
Right? And it's possible to break people's patents, and we do also do all the time. But it's really a family of patents that give you a sizable protection, because each will, the way I think about patents is, if you have a strong patent, it can make your competitor's product inferior, because he'll have to figure out a hack around it.
Yeah.
And then if you have a sizable number of these patents, then every hack your competitor has to make around your patent, his or her product will actually get inferior.
Yeah.
So you end up with a far superior product, right? So it's kind of a defense strategy. It's not an offense strategy in general, right? Which means you have to balance, because in early days of a startup, you don't have anything to defend, right? So it's really have a balance and focus most of your time in actually building that you can defend, rather than overly indexing on defense. So while we do focus, like I said, we have close to a dozen patents, many of them are granted in the US today. But I think that distinction is very important, because especially if you come from a grant side world, you, I think, over index on patents,
Yeah.
etc. Yes, they're important, but they're not going to make you money or make you a big company, right?
True.
It's only to protect you once you become big.
Yeah. So on that note, for hardware folks starting up now, right? How much really energy should they really be focusing on filing IP? Is it really relevant? Should they use resources to actually take time and file IP?
So while I think there's no one number, but I think 95% of your time, not more than 5% of your time, should be actually focused on intellectual property. Right, is what I would say. While these are like vague numbers, but then I think that should be a very small portion of your time, because you grow the business when you build stuff,
Yeah.
right? And only then the defense is valid.
Yeah. And for the same IP, I'm sure you must have started it early.
Yeah.
Right?
yeah.
I think coming from Siemens background, you might also have some motivation to do that.
Yeah. So my
Right.
co-founder had, like I said, had about 25 patent applications
Yeah.
at Siemens, right?
Yeah.
So he's very well versed with the patenting game.
Yeah. Right. So even patenting game, right? For first time entrepreneurs, they don't know who to reach out to, what sort of level of a law firm you should be probably reaching out to make sure that their patents are actually decently written and drafted.
So one is that try to use the network. I mean, use a boutique firm. If you go to a big law firm, you'll obviously, in the early days, they'll charge a bomb. So try to figure out an individual or somebody who can actually do that for you. The second thing is try to delay as much expense as possible using a PCT kind of strategy,
Yeah.
which gives you basically 36 months, right? For you to actually have the bulk of expenses.
Cool. You were a part of any incubator program?
Yes. So, we are Y Combinator backed. And
That would be an accelerator.
yeah. So, and then, in India, we had IKP Eden.
Yeah.
They put in some money, but that money came as equity, right?
Okay.
They took a small portion, but they kind of came at the valuation we were raising angel capital from.
Okay.
Right? And then I think IKP has been fairly helpful, because we still use their biolab. They are a very good biolab, and these labs actually are very expensive. It will cost you a few crores to actually build a lab yourself. So they gave the lab at a very, very subsidized price to us that we continue to use till date, etc.
I think IKP is actually super helpful because basically it houses or creates a network of a lot of folks. Basically,
Yeah.
and it could be as simple as a WhatsApp group of folks who are just building hardware.
Yeah.
Right? You can ask here, I want to find this vendor. Can you help? I want to set up a company in the US. Can you help?
Yeah,
I actually found a lot of contacts from there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have great relationship with IKP.
You hired someone from IKP.
I mean, the former IKP CEO basically
Yeah.
works in a company now. He put in the money and then ultimately he joined us. Right?
Yeah.
So,
And that's a great sign.
yeah, I mean, he knew our financials, he knew everything, and then he kind of came on board, right? So I think that obviously has been helpful. So Vikraman, who was a former IKP CEO, has been super helpful.
Got it. Cool. So you'd suggest that people should probably apply for incubators as well? Although yours was slightly different because you said they invested
We were
money.
slightly later for
Yeah.
a usual IKP company.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you this thing. I think it's definitely no non-dilutive capital and that ecosystem is definitely helpful. Like I said, my only issue with the ecosystem that often becomes is that you need to get out of that grant mode as quickly as possible and then work about commercialization. So that's my only thing. So if I were to redo it again, I would definitely use grant money, right? Because the initial capital is the most dilutive, especially for first time founders. And you know, I think our first angel investor would end up making at least 100x on the investment, right? And like I said, it is the most dilutive. So I would still use, like, if I have to read, and I have no qualms, right? We are first time founders. Somebody took a bet. He has been super helpful. So I have great respect, and I think those guys, our first angels, actually have earned that 100x, right? But then if I were to redo again with what I know now, I would actually do a combination. I would raise some angel money, and definitely get some grant money to add on to it, right? But I think having angel money or institutional money is important addition to grant money.
Agreed. I think we need that for the speed.
You need for the speed, you need that for connections, to get stuff done. So I think it needs to
True.
be mixed.
So you've already told us how you got the idea, but when you started off, what sort of prototype did you manage to build, and what was the team size? It was only you and your co-founder, or how was that structured?
You know, me and my co-founder, I think the good thing is that we have been built hardware before. We come from a hardware background, and we were pretty hands-on. We are still fairly hands-on, by the way, even today, right? But I think, so I studied electronics engineering. I was kind of well versed with, and I have designed circuit boards that a company like Siemens would take to production, etc. So I had this thing, and my co-founder was a optoelectronics kind of person, which is still the core of our product, right? So we had some background. So the first hire we made was actually one of our friend who started consulting us for mechanical engineering, and then he ultimately came on board as first employee, right? So even when we started, the first prototypes were still, you know, clunky pieces of hardware, where the whole point was to prove functionality. Right?
And you wanted to prove functionality because you wanted to raise money at that time, or what was the idea?
So prove functionality, I don't think is just for raising money. It's also for you to know. Look, like a lot of stuff we do is new tech, right? Like, so today, if you look at it, is there anybody in the world who has all the tests today on a single OS? The answer is no. Right? And the market is massive, right? So if it was like obvious or it was available, people would have done it before, right? So a lot of times we're building stuff that has not been done before, right? Which means there's a certain element of risk associated, and you are trying to also convince yourself that it has to be, it is for you. So it's not just like to prove it to someone, it's for you as well.
Got it.
Right?
So the first time when we build a prototype, it's for our own own confidence that, okay, yeah, I think it can be done.
It can be done, right? If you're in a space where you are not fully sure it can be done, right? And a lot of deep tech is like that. There are instances where it cannot be done, right? So the way I would do is I would separate a looks like and a works like prototype. When it's works like, we are trying to basically do a technology validation that it can be built and it meets my performance numbers. For example, for us, it would be accuracy of the test. For ultra human, I don't know what you measure, but it could be like, can your sensors detect steps or sleep accurately and stuff like that. So it's a functional validation. It can be done. Right.
For us, actually, battery life was also one major constraint.
Yeah, because you have a super tiny battery, right? Because the space is not there. Agreed. So you kind of do that validator of your key risks, right? So, or make a POC, right? So I think that is one side of it. Once you get a little bit of semblance on what the tech is going to look like and what is it going to be feasible, then I think I would keep kind of making it better, and in parallel start working on a industrial design or a looks like prototype, right? Like I know in many companies, like basically, or companies like Apple, where they are industrial design first and everything can be done.
True.
But I don't think that can be done with very early stage startups, because Apple can create a new type of battery because they can put $100 million for it.
They can create a new type of chipset.
New type
Yeah.
of chipset, right? We can't, right? So we are often limited by what's available as standard parts,
Yeah.
right? So we can't let ID drive everything, which a company like Apple can, really,
True.
right? I mean, they can basically remove all the chips that exist on the ultra human ring and just say, okay, this is the one SoC I'm going to make, and that's it, right? So I think that's why for us a technology POC is important, because that also feeds us inputs to the industrial design. Hey, these are my design constraints. Like, I cannot make a custom battery, so you have to live with what exists in the world, right? So I think those things become real. And then I would, at the same time, when you have a idea prototype, you would basically try to kind of build the software, the user experience, all that stuff. And then I would kind of try to merge these two and say, now I have something that looks like and works like an actual product, right?
Got it.
And we kind of followed a similar journey where we unknowingly, I think we kind of followed this. We had a very ugly looking box that worked and did the job.
The microcontroller that you were using for the prototype, it was more based on Arduino or a Raspberry Pi? Because I feel there are just two types of folks who build the first product with those two products. Yours was which one? Or it was something else?
So the first rudimentary would be like Arduino and a big wires, right? Like, essentially.
Yeah.
Because our device would not need that kind of computation that Raspberry Pi kind of offers you, right? And then we put like a small microcontroller inside and using it itself as we were getting closer to functional requirements, right?
So why I wanted to point this out was because the hobbyists from class 11, 10th or folks like that, they start with Arduino and Raspberry Pi. And then I think they would be happy to learn that the first prototype was built by an Arduino device.
Oh yeah,
Right?
absolutely. So I think our first prototype, or in our journey, a lot of de-risking or POCs, we use Arduinos, right? And and in fact, even today, you would see that one small component, if you have to test, and there's like a mech stack, and then you just have to test, we would still kind of just use Arduino for a quick prototyping, right? So I think that happens all the time. But then I think we should not confuse that this is not intended to go to production.
True.
It's a pure prototype, and
Yeah.
the actual product is going to look very different.
Yeah. When did you hire your mechanical the consultant?
Okay, so our journey is, we actually started with the underlying. So we had an underlying optical technology that could power the whole thing. We had a prototype of that.
Okay.
But then it was still very far from a product prototype. So when we were kind of building that's where we actually needed all these people, which is, we needed image processing, we needed, mechanical engineering to even make a functional prototype. Even we need an app dev, we needed a backend engineer to kind of just complete the whole chain, right? And actually make a product that functionally performs all the steps. So before we did that, we raised some money and we started assembling this team.
Okay.
Right? And as the team kept getting built, we were still working on a non-looks like but works like proto. And the whole idea was, can we actually perform all the functional product with something that doesn't look good but actually does the job, right? And because it's multidisciplinary, we needed all these disciplines, right? We needed bio, we needed software engineering, we needed electrical engineering, we needed mechanical engineering to make a functional product. And that's, I think, common with a lot of hardware products, that most hardware products need software, right? And so you basically need to have a bunch of these people to make the first functional prototype.
Right. And how long do you think you took from building the first functional prototype to a product, let's say?
I think that time was quite a lot for us.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about the certifications.
Yeah.
Let's keep that aside. But just the product where you were convinced that, okay, this is how the product maybe should look like.
Once we did the first functional proto, we started building the looks like, the industrial design, etc. And that was actually fairly quick. I think that was happened, and then I think we were also able to take the functional proto and the works like proto and actually make something that looks like and works like, right?
Okay.
I think that also was fairly quick. I think in probably 4 to 6 months you can actually complete that, right? But for us, actually, the strip side was a bigger challenge. honestly, because the device is mated to our strips. Getting the strip side right actually took much longer. It took us 18 months to actually get the strip side right, which what happened is that then we had to go back and change the device again because the strips were not compatible, right? As we
Okay.
kind of so we were initially using somebody else's test strips, and then as we kind of built our own test strips because we needed to for all the tests we wanted, that cycle took 18 months. And in that process, because the strip goes in our device as well, if you change anything on the strip interface, you have to actually change back the device. So that back and forth actually took much longer for us, right?
Got it.
If it was a pure hardware plus mechanical electronics, I think it would have been much faster.
Okay.
Because of the bio elements, that took longer. We had to actually go back and change the device.
Got it. So in your product, the complexity is more on the biomaterials and maybe some mechanical assembly of that as opposed to the electronics.
Yes, I think that would be fair. So it's optics, electronics, and bio. So electronics is actually the less complex part in our product,
Yeah.
at least in the V1. But now, we are building a V2, which will change that.
Okay. Got it.
So just to give you perspective for V1, because I was very hands-on, so I did some work initially, and then I got like a freelance people from outside to actually build the actual PCB and do the firmware. Until for V1, and we have kind of done millions of tests on our version 1 of the product, there was no embedded engineer in that company
Oh, for how long was this?
till very long time, I think, right? Like till 1.5 years, I think there was no embedded engineer in the company.
And you guys were sort of managing
We were
it
there,
yourself.
and then there was a freelance set of folks to write the firmware and help with firmware and
Okay.
and this thing, right?
And how big was the team at this time?
So I'll tell you, I think till about 75 people in the company, we didn't have an embedded engineer
Oh,
because
wow.
our electronics was fairly simple, and I was very hands-on. So
Wow.
I designed the first set of circuit boards, etc., even at a productionized stage, right?
Oh.
And with the help of a freelancer, etc. But now, obviously, we are building new products, and then obviously they have a lot more electronics complexity. It's basically now it's almost like any connected product. So the complexity has increased, and now we have built an embedded team.
Got it. Cool. So now let's move to when do we start adding third parties to the manufacturing process? Right? You have the functional prototype. You've convinced yourself that, you're convinced by the final look-like product
Yeah.
that you have now. You've hired some folks. All this is happening internally at your own office right now.
Yeah.
Now, when did you decide to move to production? And then did you plan to do that in-house or did you reach out to an EMS vendor? How was that plan?
Yeah. So I think I have. I think honestly, it depends very uniquely to who the company is. If this is for a first-time founder who's still going to figure out a lot of things, I would still suggest do it in-house, because when you go to an EMS partner, you need to have two things. What I've realized very clearly, you have to have very clear projections and a path to scale up, which if you have not done it before, can be very hard to predict because you're still not product market fit. You're still trying to build product. I think in your case it's a little bit different because you had built a distribution before, so you knew you could sell.
Yeah.
Right. So it's much easier to give projections, right? Because Ultra had a product before, etc.
Yeah.
For us, because it was our first product, that was not very clear, right? So we did it in house, and then once we had some predictability, so we moved. Before, when we were selling in India, it was actually produced in house. Before we moved to the US, we knew that we couldn't meet the FDA's regulatory guidelines without moving to an EMS partner, because our kind of facility won't have that kind of sophistication.
True.
Right? That any auditor can come and kind of approve it. So
Yeah.
that's where we moved, right? So for us, it was mostly to move to a global market. That's where we actually got an EMS. And we worked with a large publicly traded EMS company to build it for us, right? And they were very excited because this was the first, they were doing medical products for European market. This was the first FDA regulated product. So that was like the selling point
Okay.
for them. But if you don't have predictability or a high confidence in your demand scale up, I think you should probably do in-house or go to a small
Smaller.
manufacturer. But then if you kind of understand that your distribution is very strong or it could become very strong, then I would kind of go to a bigger partner.
Got it. Just taking a pause from this. When did you start the FDA process or any other certification that you might have needed? And how long did that take? How did you find those third parties who can help you do that?
So for us, that process was a good 12 to 15 months, because, and that's like pretty common for a medical device, right? And the whole regulatory strategy was done in multiple pieces. So there's like a strategic piece of regulatory under what class, how to file, and those kind of things. So by that, so now think of this, right? So over time, where are we as a company, right? So we had built a prototype, then we started selling in India, we were backed by YC, and then we raised some more capital there. So we were a slightly bigger company at that point. We were like 40-45 employees, right? And we were selling in India, so there was some proof that it works, right? That allowed us to raise money. So we worked with a pretty large law firm in the US. It's one of the top 5 law firms in the US from our regulatory strategy.
And this was through YC?
This was through an investor. Basically, we pinged one of our investors, a seed. He runs a seed medical fund. We asked him, hey, do you have any connections? And obviously YC is helpful as well. He kind of said, hey, we work with a big law firm. And then he had built a medical device before, and kind of he said, hey, this is what we work with. They're very expensive, but they're very good. But when we actually talked to them, they were able to actually cut short our whole regulatory process by a big factor.
Okay.
Right? So in that sense, that was worth this thing. But then the execution had to be done by people in India, all the documentation. So we kind of still use a 2-part regulatory strategy. We use a big law firm in the US to help with strategic needs, right? Or any interactions with the FDA directly. All the implementation actually happens via an in-house team or consultants in India.
Got it.
Right? And this whole process, like once you have the strategy, even then the implementation of the stuff, meeting all the standards, making sure all your devices meet all the testing requirements, took us about a year.
Okay. Got it. And before filing for the FDA approval or reaching out to these lawyers, did you do some tests in-house to prove their functionality?
Yeah. So look, like we already had a functional product we were selling in India, so we had all the functional testing. We had the licensing from CDSO, which is the Indian regulatory body. We obviously knew the product works, so all that was there. But the FDA stuff took much longer.
Okay.
Right? For example, just to have simple things like data security and privacy, having an internal access control system for all employees, etc. All those are part of the whole thing, right? And you have to build all that. Some of them may not be the most complex, but then it takes time.
Yeah. For example, let's say you're not compliant with some aspect of it. Are you given another chance to do a retest there? How does that work out?
So I'll tell you what. For example, usually, let's say your manufacturing has an issue. So technically you're non-compliant, right? If somebody comes and audits, they will give you a non-compliance, right? Now, usually based on the risk and how much does that harm, how much harm that cause, it could vary between them just asking you to fix it to sending them a notice or just holding your imports into the US.
Oh.
It can really, regulators have all the powers in their hands. They obviously will first tell you to fix it, etc. based on a risk class. But then if you kind of are making really grave issues, whether it's manufacturing or data security, they have all the rights to just stop you.
Okay.
Right? From selling. They basically can instruct customs to not allow the product inside the country. Right? So.
But you were not shipping before the process.
Yeah. So before you can't ship, right? So I'm saying even let's say, once you are through everything and FDA finds that there's a violation, they have all the powers to actually stop you, right?
Yeah.
So which means that compliance is not just a one-time activity for it, it's a continuous activity.
Right.
For example, even monitoring your marketing material to make sure that you're not saying anything that is out of the regulatory scope, right? Okay, so I'll just give you a simple example. For example, your product has a certain use case, okay? Let's say we measure the hormones as an aid in conception to confirm if you actually ovulate or not and stuff like that. Hypothetically, if I could say that I could use these hormones to detect ovarian cancer, and there are applications like this. So we have to limit our advertising to the use cases that are approved.
Understand.
Or allowed, right?
Yeah.
If I kind of go ahead and say Inito can help you detect ovarian cancer, we are immediately going to get stopped by the FDA.
Yeah.
Now, because if you make a claim that is so outrageous, they're going to block you, right? But then if you have minor violations, etc., they'll probably come back and say fix it. If you don't fix it, they can obviously escalate it, right? So it's really regulators in this space have wide arcing powers, right, to stop you. So you shouldn't be messing with regulators, basically.
Got it. And I think anyway, since it's a 15-month long journey, you really don't want to mess it up. Because the time cost is actually much more than anything else.
Yeah, exactly. So it's time cost, it's long-term relationships, because you don't want to, because you don't want to build just one product, right?
Yeah.
If you're in a long journey, you want to kind of build a lot more products.
Yeah. Cool. Now coming back to the production and EMS.
Yeah.
We decided we built a product. You said you also reached out to an EMS partner at some point in time. This happened before you got any regulatory approvals for the Indian market, or?
Yeah. So we had regulatory approvals in it for India, and then we were looking for an EMS partner largely for the US.
Right. But before that, in India, you were manufacturing yourself.
Yeah.
Got it. And regarding the DFM and DFA, those things were being done in-house, or you had a consultant to do that?
We largely were doing it in-house, because by that time we had built a team with people who had done it before. And this is, I think, for people who are kind of listening this podcast and who are just start. There's a huge difference, like I think you also know, between something that works, but then something can be manufactured at scale, right? And you do want people who have done this before, and that could be an EMS partner who offer design services, or a consultant, or your in-house team. I think we were lucky in a way that we could build a team in-house that could do it, right? But everyone will need people who can do this, because it's a different nuance on understanding. It's a very different game when you make like 5 units and then everything is like made to fit each other. If it doesn't fit, you basically file something little bit and put it together or glue it together, versus when something has to be made 100,000 times or 10,000 times, it is a completely different game, and everything has to work, everything has to be qualified, everything has to be tested, each subcomponent, and that is a completely different game. So unless, I think, most founders haven't done that before, right? And if you have not done before, I think it's almost like mandatory to get someone. That could be in-house, that could be a consultant, that could be this thing. Like I said, for us it was this thing. But my understanding is a lot of EMS partners also have design services who will kind of help you get there.
Right. I have actually had mixed experiences with the design services which a third party provides. I think having an independent view from an external consultant who is not from the EMS and maybe someone in-house, that might really help.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, there's a very large manufacturing company who knows what they're doing.
And the other side is that you don't want to go to a large manufacturing company anyways, because you will be nobody for them. So
yeah. I think the speeds don't work out. They have their own processes, their own hierarchy, and of course their own interests, that, you know, multiple clients, and this is the most important client of mine and you are not primary. So things like that. I think for startups, early startups who are building 100, 500 units, let's say, per month, they have to go to a smaller EMS partner.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I'll tell you, we went to a bigger EMS partner before launching this, because there was this whole, we could really tell people that, hey, we are going to get to the US, it's going to be a class 1 medical device regulated by the FDA. So there was that selling element, and we kind of, through our connections by this time, knew the founders or promoters of the EMS company, and so we could kind of use leverage a little bit of that, right? So I think so we went to an EMS partner. One is that we had been selling in India, so there was a certain level of maturity in the product. We were not kind of changing it every day, right? I mean, we were, but I think we had a lot more maturity in the process, if we would have gone earlier. So I think that's one part. The other thing is that, there are two other factors. This was going to be the first US or FDA regulated product for the EMS partner, which was obviously a selling point for them to go to their other medical customers and say that, because they were doing European products. And the third was, we kind of figured out, we knew the owners of that company through an investor, right? So that kind of brought in a little bit of leverage in the relationship in order to talk to. So when we went there, we were actually able to meet directly the promoters or the owners of the company. If it's a large company, they would also not take meetings with you, right? So we were able to do that pretty easily. So I think it's a combination of these factors that worked for us. But yes, I think absolutely there is no denying that the processes are going to be much more, and the internal controls are going to be much more than the pace you would like stuff to be with. And that's always going to be the case. The other thing is that, if you go to a very large EMS versus a small EMS, I think the big difference is going to be that you don't want to be the smallest customer for that EMS, because when supply chain issues are going to happen, like during COVID, you had a huge semiconductor shortage, they're going to put their sourcing teams in sourcing the bigger customers, right? Rightly so. Like anybody in the time of distress focus on the biggest customer, and they would also do that. So which means that you are left, your team is going to source your stuff or get your supply chain in order when issues happen. So I think the thing with the EMS partners, if you should ideally go to someone who matches your size, right? And my general recommendation is to go a little later.
Yeah, once you have all the processes set up, you know what you're doing.
When you know what you're doing, right? Like initially, most of us didn't know what we are doing.
Yeah, I think that also happens when you've built your, I'd say, the 100th product, assembled it yourself. Maybe that is when you probably realize, okay, this is now consistent. This is a stable process. Now I think someone else can manufacture.
Yeah, for us, for us, the number was thousands. We had made thousands of units before we actually got to the EMS partner, right? And that is why I say that we had a much better understanding of the manufacturing process than we did. And in fact, to some extent, I think initially we did feel that it is actually helping us, because it made our qualification jigs, etc., all the like testing infrastructure more solid than what we would have done otherwise.
Right. Actually, in our case, we had a very custom design manufacturing process.
Yeah.
So because rings typically are not made with screws and nuts and bolts, which are typical assembly processes. So we had to create our own molds and test out a few processes. Actually, one of the processes that we use for manufacturing was not really meant for mass production. Mm-hmm. We sort of customized it to make sure it is actually giving a yield which is required for mass production of products. So we had to work very closely with all these suppliers, vendors who were supposedly the experts at what they do, but a lot of hand-holding and R&D was required to work together with them to make sure we end up with a stable production line.
For you, I think maybe it's like the small form factor brings its own challenges, right? For us, it was optics as one piece and then our test strips as one piece, right? And that you would be out of the comfort zone, and that's why we exist, right? As a startup, the fundamental thing is you're trying to do something new, which means that you will run into things that are unique to you, right? And I don't think that anybody else can solve it for you, so you have to figure it out, right? So, which is the other side. Like I do think that hardware startups are best done by people who have some hardware experience. Otherwise, the learning curve is like just immense.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of this podcast is to make that learning curve smaller.
Exactly.
So basically sharing information of whatever we know. Right now, actually, on that note, I think we see a lot of issues when selecting vendors on the misalignment or quality control. Right? We are trying to build consumer products which are, for us, it's like super premium. Yeah. They have to look good. Yeah. There couldn't be any one scratch. Even when we look at, from this far, we faced a long time in convincing a lot of suppliers of us that this is a issue and you have to correct it.
Yeah.
Right? I think that also takes a lot of time.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing, and then defining that in your quality standard, what's acceptable, and quantifying that is the other hard part, right?
True.
The difference between like making 5 units and then making yourself 5 units and then making 100,000 units is that one is you are not going to do. There's a person on the factory floor who may not appreciate these finer details, who may not care about you have a scratch. For us, it was like optical components, dust standards, and those kinds of things. I think for us the issue was not just like in convincing them, but also defining a quantitative standard on what's okay. I'll give you an example. Like we do optics manufacturing, and then there's a certain standard on scratch, dust, etc. that we can tolerate, right? Where the readings are not affected.
Yeah.
And even defining those numbers, we had a hard time because none of us had productionized optics before. And there's very little optics manufacturing talent in the country who could do that. So what we did is we roped in a consultant from Germany, right, who had done this many times before. He was a principal engineer at a big German optics company. So we got him even to define what a standard should be, right? Because, you have these weird standards on X micron scratch is allowed, and this many micrometer dust particles are allowed. And how do you even detect
the viewing
that?
distance, the light,
Exactly,
everything.
right? So those kind of things, and I think in visual also they're like, what you won't have everything ultra, like you have to put some quantification in saying, hey, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, etc. Right? Because otherwise, how is the guy on the line going to accept or reject a part? Right? Maybe you'll have some tolerances, etc. So for us, I think even that was a challenge in not just like convincing them, but also putting a standard to it and then making sure that gets followed.
Yeah, true. Agreed. We also had the same thing. Now, you said your EMS suppliers you were able to connect through your investors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you look at any other options also? At the
yes. So we didn't look at one EMS. When we knew that we were going to go EMS, we looked at 5 or 6 EMS partners. And we spoke to them. We visited their factories. We had lunch with the kind of owners of all of them.
Yeah.
Right. And then we kind of prioritize based on, the quality of manufacturing, the factory, how much access we have to the leadership in that.
Yeah.
Right. Also, how close or far it is from our office, right? Like, I think only big companies with super stable processes can
have a remote setup.
Right? I know companies who basically manufacture in China, but then somebody is actually flying every week to China from the office to this thing, right? For us, either we could have done that, or we said, hey, there were some extra points for somebody being in Bangalore, right? Essentially in our prioritization or who to go with.
Yeah.
Because it's much easier to drive down to someone than actually sending someone flying out,
Yeah.
etc. So we ended up picking a partner who's in Bangalore. We were happy with the quality. We could reach the management or the leadership of that organization. And so I think that was it. So this is not just like who can do the job. It's also more than that, right? Because
Got it.
And even today, I think someone from our office is there at the manufacturing or the EMS partner's place like 3 times a week.
Yeah. Right. So I think the same goes for any mechanical part manufacturer, the injection molding guy, and everything else together, right?
Yeah.
So the way of vetting a supplier would be, if you have to give priority to each of these things, the first would be access, because you know that there's going to be a lot of R&D going back and forth, right? You'll have to sit with them, fix few issues, make sure quality is controlled and all those things. So the first part was vicinity. You're close by.
Yeah.
Second is the access to leadership, so that if anything breaks down, the top guy who can help solve the problem.
Yeah.
The third was,
which is obviously, I think that's zero, whether somebody can actually build to your standard or they have experience doing that, right? Like, I think that's like really the first one, right? Where that's the basic. If somebody has the capability to build your product, that's obvious.
Assuming that the capability is still there.
Yeah.
The first would be vicinity.
Yeah.
Second would be access to the leadership. End-to-end knowledge of the company's hierarchy. Third, maybe the cost.
Third is cost. For us, there's a fourth one as well, which actually is probably more important than some of the other three, is
because
regulatory,
because
we are a medical product. So we only looked at vendors that meet the ISO 13485, which is the European medical device standard. And we actually didn't speak to anyone who's not compliant, right? Because we knew it would take a long time for us to set up the processes, and the whole point of EMS for not doing it ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think that was a screening criteria, and some of the people who are actually seeing this podcast, if they're in a regulated industry that needs that, I think that's a bare minimum.
Right. So that filters out the required folks anyway.
Yeah.
Got it. When you decide you want to invest in a injection mold for the product?
For us, what we did is, because our device, right, is a simpler assembly than our test strips. For test strips, because the volume is like much higher, you can't do anything without injection molding. So we had to injection mold, right? But for the device side, for the first thousands or so units, 1,000 or so, I think we actually 3D printed them. Now people argue it is super expensive to 3D print 1,000 units, etc. But the design was evolving so fast that we couldn't actually injection mold, right? And I still feel that's okay, because the first time if you kind of go to an injection mold with an unprepared design, you're anyways going to make mistakes. You're going to lose 4 months and the money, right? So it's better to actually get to a more mature design and do 3D print. For us, it worked. It may not work for everyone. For example, probably I don't think you can 3D print the ultra human ring every part.
When aesthetics is a big part of it, you can't really 3D print.
Yeah, right. So it depends on the category, but then the whole principle is that we tried to delay injection molding until the design was mature as much as possible. But I understand there are limitations. Not everything you could do. For example, something is a very aesthetic part, something is very illumination kind of visual kind of part, you can't do it, right? And that's where you want to injection mold, because once you do it, even there you would want to start with the one cavity tool first, and then once you kind of are happy with it, then you kind of make a multi-cavity 4-8 cavity tool with it.
Actually, a lot of folks differentiate between a prototype to a product once they've invested in a mold. So the thing which comes out of the mold and then it's assembled, they consider that as a product. But I think that's a very wrong way to look at it.
Yeah.
If the product is looking, is looking as it is supposed to, it's functioning as it's supposed to, I think that's the product.
Yeah, I think it's 3D printing or injection mold is a manufacturing process, right?
Yeah.
But then what I call a productionizable process is if I do the same sequence of steps 1,000 times, I will get 1,000 products. Correct. Right? And that is the real difference. Now, I could do it with 3D printing. Yes, it's going to be expensive, but I could really do that, right? And then if I've made my 3D printing design in a way that it can be moldable, then I should be fine with the same process, right? But then oftentimes the difference between a manufacturable product and a manufacturable product and something that's not is that are you doing some custom steps for each unit that is coming out? Like you're gluing something that you're not supposed to, that you're like filing something, fixing something. And those are the things, or assembly takes an insane amount of time that cannot be done at scale, right?
Yeah.
Often those are the things that define whether something is manufacturable, a prototype or a product, not the process itself, right? So we did a lot of 3D printing and I think we learned a tremendous amount by actually doing that and to be able to have a final product.
Yeah, I think that's part of the DFM journey, right? When you keep prototyping and trying to figure, okay, this has become much more reliable now. Now I'll shift to a larger manufacturing process which will bring the cost down, maybe the quality up. But I have to invest in a mold, or I have to invest
and your design needs to be mature, because the first time you do it, it's going to be 3-4 months easily.
Yeah.
Now obviously we can do it much faster, etc.
Yeah.
So one thing we did is, because we were doing so much 3D printing and we didn't buy our own 3D printer, we kind of build, because we were doing so much, our vendors of 3D printing, we made the process that you place an order today and you would get the prints in 2 days or 1 day, right? And that I think was very helpful in the iteration speed.
Same for us. We actually procured 2 3D printers. But then I think printers, like any other machines, like typical printers of a household, stop working after a certain amount of time. And there's just no going back on repairing it and things like that.
Absolutely. So we also now have a 3D printer. And then that day we were having a chat that, hey, we should probably gift a 3D printer to our top mechanical engineer. And then the guy who leads our mechanical engineer is like, trust me, nobody wants it. If you know how difficult it is to maintain, nobody wants it.
True.
Right? So it needs a proper room to run. It's full of chemicals to clean it. So it's
Yeah, it's quite an effort.
Yeah.
I mean, we still have those two 3D printers. One of them is functional apparently, but then one which got some issues. I think it never got fixed.
Yeah.
So I think outsourcing 3D printing is the right approach.
Yeah.
But of course, with a reliable partner who
Who
delivers
can do it very quickly.
it in time. How did your investment journey start? You said you raised capital right before the first functional prototype, and then you raised later as well. How difficult was that? How was the conversation at that time? How did that work out?
Yeah. So like I said, the way I define is like there are three broad phases for the company. One is where we didn't have a product, right? And then the second was we were selling in India. And the third was post when we were about to launch in the US, right? So the pre-phase was the hardest. And I think because we were raising angel money, the first check came when it was just a paper product. Obviously the dilution was super high, etc. But once we got a great investor. Once we got a great investor, at the same time we built the functional prototype and it looks like prototype, right? But it was in a prototype state. It was not a scalable production thing. And we were also naive. And I think that point is we were able to raise more capital at a much better valuation, right? Where we said, hey, we have something, this is what it's going to look like and work like. We know it works. And then we need time to actually productionize it and take it to manufacturing. And like I said, our strip also took like a while to actually do that. So the first was before a small check, like before we had a functional prototype. Once we were able to, and today if I were to do it again, I would look at alternate sources of capital like grants and other things for that initial sub 2 crores that you would need to actually, or 1-2 crores, whatever that money is to actually get there, right? Once you do that, then I think it is much easier to raise some more angel capital from external people, because now people can touch and feel the product. They know what it's going to look like. You can define the value prop more effectively, etc. So if I were to redo, I would do like non-traditional sources. We raised angel check and they have been super helpful, but there are now options, right, which didn't exist back then. Next, once you have a functional prototype that is look and feel, then we were able to raise some more money, which was a more sizable check. And I think we underraised at that time. We were able to raise, but I think we underraised, and that brought us in what is called a valley of death for hardware startups, that you are post prototype, you are not fully productionized. There are a lot of issues, so you're not able to sell, right? Because there are production problems. And then because you underestimated how difficult it is to actually take something from a prototype to production, you raise less, right? And so we did the exact same mistake.
And so, how much were you planning to raise at that time?
So we raised, I think, at that point about $500,000. Okay. Right? But it was nothing, right? And
for you'll also spend on the certifications.
So I think we had to raise more, and then we were able to get to India. Then we had to raise again to actually go through certifications, etc. So it was like our fundraising journey has been very, very non-traditional. So what happened was, like I said, we raised till we had a prototype so we raised our prototype stage. We were stuck in the middle because even our India sales were not happening because our product was not productionized enough. So that was the most difficult stage, where we actually had no money. People were not putting in money because now you are in the middle. You neither have a product that is sellable, but then you are ahead of a prototype stage. It's much easier to raise like some more in the same round than actually putting a bridge together, right? I think that was very hard. And then once we were doing in India, we went to YC at that time, right? And there we were able to raise some more capital that allowed us to actually go through the journey of, preparing for the US journey. In mid-COVID came, and then we raised some more money. So, I mean, that all that was there.
Actually, I think you were the first hardware startups who've gone to YC from India.
Yeah, so we are the first. We are the first hardware startup from India that went to YC, right? So I think at that point, what was also happening is that the Indian angel ecosystem that would support hardware at that time was very, very small. And because we had already raised one initial and then one more round, we were kind of running out of people in India who'd put angel money. But then YC gave us a US network. And also people in India were also more interested once we did YC, right? So we did that. And then pre-US launch, because still there was no VC. So these are still smaller angel size checks. So you will run out of them very, very quickly. So we were getting back to market every 9 months, right? And what happened was then pre-US is where we had a slightly easier time raising. Slightly easy as in we were able to tell people, hey, we are going to come into the US. We know the product was in India and it's going to be a huge success. So I think that was one thing. So I would divide into 2 phases. One is pre-product, where the biggest mistake was underraise between prototype and production.
And how long did it take for you to go from the first check to the prototype?
1 year we were.
1 year.
1 year.
Okay. So if you have to just summarize that, right from the beginning, the idea to prototype plus prototype to product, it would take typically 2 years.
It would take typically
minimum 2 years. And additionally, if you have certification and other things in place,
that would take a
right.
lot more.
And of course, productionizing is also going to take some time.
Yeah, for us that journey was also longer because we were a very R&D bio heavy company. But a typical hardware product, I would say 2 years, 10 people.
Okay, got it. If you had to raise again, how much would you have raised? From the beginning to building the product?
If I were to do it again, I think now I have a better understanding. I think prototype is a few people, right? Plus some consultants around, hardware. So I would raise for that. While I won't say the exact numbers, but I think it's budget for a few people because you will need hardware engineering, software engineering, mechanical engineering, all that, like a bunch of people plus industrial designer. Some of them will not be on your roles. So budget for a couple of people for a year, at least as the first.
Couple of people as in sub 10.
Sub 10 people, right? Then from prototype to productionizing, I would budget for 20-30 people for 18 months, right? And double that number. Because what I believe is that based on unique challenges for every startup, and obviously I'm just giving a ballpark number because there'll be these investments in tooling, all that you'll be making at the same time. So I'm just taking a blanket number. But then I think that every first time founder underestimates that journey. At least we underestimated that hugely. And then I would just double whatever you think, right, is the right number.
Got it.
But obviously you don't want to raise in so many parts. If you have the leverage, then raise everything in one go.
Yeah.
But I'm saying in discrete steps, these are the calculations, right?
Right. If we have to look at a number still, let's not say medical, but any other consumer hardware, which does not require so much certification because that's an additional expense.
Yeah.
I think, do you think raising close to $1 million, $1.5 million is good enough to get to the product?
I think so. I think you should be able to manage in $1 million.
Okay. Got it. Cool. And
but I think that also, I think when you start hardware, and we all came from very naive places where we didn't know, I think we thought that in a space like us, which is highly regulated, R&D heavy, patent heavy, we originally thought we'll actually get to market in $300,000.
Yeah.
An order of magnitude more, right?
100%.
And I think if you don't have special regulatory stuff like us, you would need $1 million, right? And now, this is obviously not to scare anyone who's doing hardware, but then you can raise it in parts, and now there's a lot more ecosystem. But I think $1 million is the minimum that you would need to get to that point.
Got it. So maybe if you have to split it, maybe 200, 300,000 for the first initial setup, functional prototype and things like that. Then the rest of it, 700K types for
taking it to production.
Yeah. This does not include marketing yet.
This does not include marketing. That's why I'm saying $1 million is minimum, because what happens is that now when you have a prototype or when you have a product that is sellable, people expect you to have traction.
Yeah.
Right? Which means that you need to have sufficient runway and capital to sell to at least enough people that you can have product market fit, true product market fit. So then the number would be 2x of that, right? Or you want to have another $500,000 to $1 million to actually do that, right? So if you want to do like a hardware product from scratch, which is non-bio and non-medical, I think you'll end up needing north of $1.5 million before you can prove that customers
PMF,
adopt it,
yeah.
right? I think that's the reality of the
Right.
space.
And I think after PMF, the game changes.
Because now, see, we have to also understand that in this process, by the time you hit PMF, you're already 3 years.
Yeah.
Because, we said 2 years to get a product out, and then, PMF usually takes 6-8 months at the minimum for people to discover. There's also brand work, there's also marketing assets need to be created, people need to be hired, all that stuff, right? So you're kind of roughly at a 3-year mark by the time you hit PMF.
Yeah.
Correct? Now, VCs have VCs is not their capital, right? VCs raise money from their LPs, which means that they are at 4 years, they are basically on the road to raise their next one, typically, right? They'll deploy all the money in 3 years, and then the 4th year, they are also raising their own capital. And because you don't have traction, you have PMF, you don't have that much traction, you have not seen a huge bulk in change in, like that hockey stick has not, in valuation has not yet hit you, right? Which means that it's very difficult for a VC to justify when there is a next round that this company has become very valuable yet, because in 3 years you just got to PMF.
Yeah.
Correct? Which means that a traditional hardware company, it's very difficult for a VC to justify that, right? Because 3 years ho gaya, right? And so now is where you can actually get institutional capital, because once you have hit PMF, the expectation is you can grow very fast. And after PMS is where you can actually get institutional capital, larger rounds, because now you can also justify that, hey, I have PMF. In fact, my argument is that hardware companies, while it's difficult to build the product, has already taken 2-3 years, but your revenue growth can be much faster than a SaaS or anything else, right? And this will obviously have a massive markup in valuation, because at the end, unfortunately, like the VC is also going to sell your valuation to someone else, right? So it kind of makes life easy to raise money after that.
Got it. After PMF, some traction proof, and then we raise from VC.
Yeah.
Got it. We discussed about PMF. For you, what would you consider PMF?
I think while we talk a lot about PMF, honestly, there's no hard definition of what a PMF feels like. And these are all very subjective definitions. But I think, at least for our journey, there was an inflection point where suddenly you will feel that acquisition temporarily doesn't become a problem anymore, right? You will feel that once you hit the chord, you will see that your customer acquisition just gets on steroid very, very quickly. And you will see that inflection point. So if you're plotting your last 6 months, at that inflection point, you will see a clear difference. And why I call that as PMF, because I think it's a combination of product market fit and channel fit as well when you hit. So just product market fit is not sufficient. Like let's say you have a product that 20 people like, but you also need to figure out how to get 2,000 more, right? And I think once you figure that sweet spot, your acquisition temporarily will stop becoming a problem. Obviously at 10x the scale of that, you will still have to find new channels, etc. Will temporarily stop becoming a problem. And then you will see that your cohorts or usage still holding up or getting better, right? So usually what happens if you rapidly scale, then your cohorts or retention or usage falls down. In my view, if you have solved that acquisition problem temporarily for a 10x scale, right? And your cohorts are actually not getting worse, but they're getting better. That I think is a very clear sign that you are hit PMF, because now what you're saying is if I continue to do what I'm doing, I can scale for another 10x, right? Without actually affecting my usage parameter drastically, right? Obviously you'll need cash to scale it 10x and you'll need a bigger team and infrastructure to do that. But you see a path to that, right? I think for me that is PMF. And in some way it's a combination of consumers liking your product and you knowing how to sell them.
Got it.
Right?
So would you say that from selling 50 to 500, if we are able to find out a sustainable and a consistent approach, which is repeatable in nature, then we know it's PMF?
Yes, but in consumer products, what I have noticed is that transition happens very quickly. Either you'll be like at 50 or, a small number of units trying to figure out what I want to do, or it will take an immense amount of capital to actually acquire more customers. When you hit it, you will actually move very quickly from 50 to 100 and 200, right? In a very small time frame, right?
Yeah.
Which means that during that zone, your acquisition problem is like solved, right?
Got it.
So I think 500 is probably a good number,
Yeah.
right? And
And it could vary from product to product.
Yeah. Obviously, if you're selling a 100 rupee product, then that's a different story, right?
Yeah.
But most of us are selling products that cost like $5,000-10,000.
Yeah. Got it. I think we've seen a growth of manufacturing on B2B related funds, but I don't think still there is something related to consumer hardware as such.
Yeah, there's very little consumer hardware,
I think
right?
Hacks was a great example at the time, 2020 early. But I think that also I haven't really seen a lot of consumer coming through Hacks now.
Yeah, so I think one is that it used to be 5 years ago, very
Yeah.
popular.
Yeah.
Popularity has come down.
Yeah.
I also think not big success stories have come out,
Yeah.
right? And then also they're not in India. So
True.
if you're talking about India context, the very little companies from India actually have been to Hacks, right?
True.
So I think hardware founders in India are still off to themselves and the ecosystem and
Yeah.
the small amount of people here
Yeah.
to figure out stuff themselves. But I think once you prove PMF, there are enough people, right? And I also see a clear trend change. I think when 5 years ago, when I used to like meet VCs, then there was very little interest. But I think that is changing drastically now. Like a lot of people want to do deep tech now, right? And there's a tremendous amount of interest. So I think the game is changing.
Yeah. I think we're still in the early stages of showing success in consumer hardware products.
Yeah.
There haven't been a lot of great examples in the past. I think Atomberg is one clear example, which has done like amazing.
Yeah.
Apart from that, I think it's up to companies like ours who have to sort of show that there is possibility of success, and then maybe it looks more like a VC investable game.
Absolutely. And I think you're bang on. Atomberg, maybe there'll be like one or two more who have done a great job in India. We also have to remember that they're in a vast horizontal market that is India focused.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's a couple of new age startups who are trying to build for the world.
Yeah.
From India. You guys are one, we are one. There are a couple of our common friends who are there, right? So like Miko and a couple of others, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's up to us to prove to everyone or the investors that great hardware business can be built from India for the world. I mean, I believe strongly that we are finally as an ecosystem in a spot that we can build from India for the world, right? And I think that will happen now.
Yeah. Cool. I think that concludes the session. Aayush, thank you so much for sharing your experience. This has been super helpful. I'm sure people listening in would learn a lot from this and have their fundraising journey to building journey made simpler.
Thanks, Apoor. It's a pleasure to kind of share whatever we learned with the ecosystem, and I hope that companies like us kind of create examples for the ecosystem that we indeed can build consumer hardware from India for the world. And all the people who are watching this podcast find it a little bit easier than us to actually build companies inside the country.
True. I hope that the 3-year window becomes shorter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Aayush, again.